All right, so in this video, I wanted to show how to actually disassemble the Samsonas shock and then refill and recharge it properly. There's a lot going on here and it's pretty involved. So there's another video for actually just re-greasing the shock body and the bushings. And this one will take a look at the actual internals of the shock. So to start off with, I've got this all separated from the actual lower mount here. And what we're gonna do first is we're gonna pop the end cap off here. It's just a cover cap that goes on top of the shock housing here, and we need to get that off to get at the snap ring inside. These are just lightly press fit on. So if you just get some channel locks and wrap a rag around this, you can usually just twist this off. I actually had a problem with this coming off and rattling around inside the shock body on stage. So what I've done is I've actually taken a center punch and I've lightly peened 4 places here so that it's a bit of a press fit when this goes back on, just to eliminate the possibility of this slipping off during operation, if you will. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how to remove this snap ring in here first. That's going to be the real difficult part of this. But before we can remove that snap ring, we have to relieve the pressure in the shock itself. So the way we're going to do that is by using the needle valve that we use to recharge the shock. We're going to put this in here and then we're going to relieve the pressure before we start taking this apart so we don't turn this into a cannon. It's practically impossible to take apart when it's pressurized. I've already relieved the pressure in this unit, and then I took an 11mm wrench, and you can take the pressurization cap right off the top here. So now, next steps. What we need to do is push this end cap down, and let me change the camera view here. We need to push this end cap, or sill cap as I've heard it called, down so that we can get the snap ring out. Now the snap ring also doesn't have any holes or anything, so it's a little difficult to work with here. So the first thing we're going to do to enable this is we're going to take this dust shield off the end. I'm going to use a flat blade screwdriver. I'm just going to lightly pry up on this dust shield. And that pops off. And in this case, the little rubber wiper came with the dust shield, so that might stay down here. You might have to slide the rubber wiper off. All right. So with that out of the way, what we need to do next is, now that this is depressurized, we need to compress or push down this end sill so we have room to get the snap ring out. To get the snap ring out, we're actually going to push the snap ring down and then pivot it and pull it back out. So the best way to do this is I'm going to get this stable in a vertical position here. I'll change the camera angle again. We need to push down quite heavily on this end sill to create the room that we need. So right here I've just got a tube, a metal tube that slips over and contacts on this end sill, and I've rounded the edges because you really don't want to peen over or damage this end sill in any way. And we're going to start tapping that to push it down, create some room. All right, so that was fairly easy. Those are soft taps, and now what I've got is plenty of room to push that snap ring down. So I'm going to take my flat blade screwdriver, and on the protruding end of the snap ring, I'm going to push out and down to pop it out of the groove. And it's not a square groove. The bottom edge of this groove is actually beveled, so it leads the snap ring to being pushed down and into the tube. And I've already got it out of the groove. So now I'll push it down all the way around. There we go. And then I will gently pry up to rotate the snap ring and pull it out. You need to be very careful not to score the actual bore inside of the shaft here, the housing for the shock, because all your O-rings and everything are going to be slipping past this, and if you score it heavily, you're immediately going to damage your O-ring, your Teflon seals, etc. as you pull the rest of it out. So that's the snap ring out. Now the next step is to pull the piston and shaft out of the body here. And this can be kind of difficult. So here it just popped, I'm just hand pressure getting it up, but now I need to get the O-ring and the Teflon seal and everything else past that snap ring groove. And that can be difficult. What can help here is if you have a way to like gently just slide hammer this off. So if you do something like slide a wrench over the end here and then put a nut back on, just to get you some leverage to pop this up and off. And I can't get this by hand. Okay, so I've gotten this to the point where it's about ready to come out. So I'll get it vertical again because I don't want to spill fluid everywhere. And I'm just going to gently rock it. And there we go. Now I might need to rock the piston again a little bit to get the Teflon seal by. And there we go, it's out. So let's take a look at this piston and shaft assembly. So immediately I can see a piece of O-ring here. I've actually cut the O-ring that's on this end sill in getting this off. So I will have to replace that. So what I'll do is I'll slide the sill cap or end cap off. It comes right off the shaft now. And now I'm just looking at the piston and shaft itself. So we have a Teflon seal here, and that spreads open and comes right off. And then we have an O-ring seal here. This all looks good. I'm not going to change that. And I'll set this off to the side for now. And now the next step is going to be dumping out all the fluid. So I'll just turn this upside down and I'll pour the fluid in here. Now I just had this apart so the fluid's nice and clean. And as long as I don't see any debris or particulate in there, I'll probably just reuse that. I've had this apart about 3 times now. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is get the partition piston out of this shock body. And it should just slide right down. I'm going to just take a little wire here through the top and I'm going to push it out. And you can see it at the end here. And give it a little wiggle. I'll see if I can't slide that past. And here that comes out. And you can see the partition piston has another Teflon seal, no O-ring underneath the seal on this one, and then a large O-ring to seal it at the top. And I'll look at that. That looks undamaged. I'm going to set this off to the side. So now I've got this completely apart. You can see right through the opening in the top. So now this is just the housing. So I'll wipe this down and get this all ready for the actual rebuild phase. All right, so here we are. We're ready to actually put this back together. This is totally empty right now and clean. I've got new O-ring on my end cap here. I've cleaned up all my components, my partition piston and my shaft and such. So I've also cleaned up the snap ring groove here. This is especially easy to score when you're taking the end seal cap off and getting that snap ring free with a screwdriver. So I just actually had some 1000 grit sandpaper. I went over the very end of the bore here to make sure there was no lip or raised protrusion that's going to tear up my O-ring or any of my seals as I push them past. So the first thing we have to do is put this partition piston back in. And this has to be held in a particular location in the actual housing bore here as we fill with fluid and reassemble and everything else. So we have to keep this in a specific place so the actual gas pocket is sufficient here for the damper. So what I've made for mine, and you'd have to get these measurements for your specific damper, is I've made just a pin basically to hold this partition piston in the right spot as we put this together. So I'm going to slide this in, and I've got a screw here to just hold that in place as I do this. And basically now I can slide my partition piston in all the way down and stop it against that pin. And so I'll use this rod to push the partition piston down. And there we go. I'm against the stop pin. Now I can start putting some fluid in. So I'm going to fill this about 2/3 of the way full with fluid. All right. And now I can actually slide my shaft and piston in. And just make sure that this Teflon seal is pushed together. Very gently slide that past. Now I'm going to actuate it up and down in the fluid very slowly to work the air out of the areas of this piston. And we're going to do this a couple times, and then we're going to leave it alone and let it settle for a few minutes. And then we'll continue on. All right, so we worked the air out. We're going to fill this basically all the way to the top now, to the snap ring groove itself. And this might make a bit of a mess here because what I'm going to do next is push the sill cap down far enough to get the snap ring on. And that does mean that it's probably going to overflow because you really want to get that all the way to the top filled with fluid. All right, so as I put this on, I want to make sure this O-ring is actually lubed up so that as I push it past the snap ring groove here, it doesn't get damaged. I'm going to pull the shaft up just a little bit more. Actually, I'm going to make sure this inside is also lubed up. So there's a little bronze bushing here and then another seal on the bushing. You don't want to damage that. And I'll just twist it in, get it past the threads very gently. And I'll push this down. And you can see here we've got our fluid overflowing. I push this down. And I'm forcing air out as I go. And I might need my tool here just to tap this end cap down a little bit. All right. So here I can't get it any farther because what's happening is the fluid can't compress and I've got a rod holding the partition piston in place. So at this point, to get the last little bit I need to get that sill cap down enough to get the partition piston on is I'm going to pull out my set rod from the other. And now I'm going to again tap this down. All right, there we go. That is past the snap ring groove. I'm going to push this snap ring into place. There we go. And we're all ready to go. Now, the sill cap is not up against the snap ring. This is not going to happen until we actually pressurize the other end of the shock. So what I'll do now is I'll lay this thing on its side. Oof. And I pressurize the other end with the partition piston a little bit. And here, I'm going to thread on the pressure cap that has the hole for the needle valve. So tighten that. All right. We are now ready to fill this with pressure. So let me get this positioned. As soon as you pressurize it, it's going to push the shaft out. And here's where I've got my needle. And I'm going to pierce the seal on the end here. And then pressurize it to 115 psi. And be very careful not to move this hose sideways and break the needle. Alright, so the needle's in. I'll crack my regulator. Increase the pressure just a bit. Alright. Turn off the gas. I'm at 115 psi now. I'm going to crack the hose. It's going to empty the pressure out of that line. Now I'm going to slowly pull the needle valve out. I did the hose first just so I can hear if the gas leaking is from the actual end of the seal on the damper and not just out of the line here, because obviously I want that damper to seal up almost immediately, so I keep my pressure in there. And there we go. That sounded pretty good. So the last thing I would do is slide my little dust seal on, and then slide the dust cap on top of that. And it's just a little push fit on top there. And that's done. We're ready to reassemble this back into the housing. It's all recharged and refilled.